everyone, and welcome back. Today, our presenter is Barney Lessing. Barney is a jazz enthusiast of many years who has written liner notes for several jazz albums. And you may have heard him. He has appeared as a guest on many radio programs. Today, his emphasis is going to be on Sarah Vaughan and the culture of jazz. So many of you remember Barney Lessing when he led so successfully the jazz club that met every month in the Coleridge Lounge. Sadly, because of the restrictions on assembly, we had to suspend that. But that won't be for very long, hopefully. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Sarah Vaughan and the culture of jazz as led by a great jazz enthusiast, Barney Lessing.
Hi, Fred. Thank you very much. And John, thank you for your efforts in putting this together. Soundies. What were soundies? How many of you out there recall the soundies? Soundies existed from about 1941 to 1945. It was on one of these soundies that Sarah Vaughan first appeared to the general public, a little bit later than 45. And we want to start the program by watching her sing. Youthful, young, after her career was starting and launching. And let's open up with that. Let's go back now. The specific year of this video is about 1950. The song is one many of you will know, "The Nearness of You."
Just wither and forget our resistance when you and your magic pass by. My heart in a dither, dear, when you're at a distance. But when you are near, oh my, it's not the pale moon that excites me, that thrills and delights me. Oh no, it's just the nearness of you. It isn't your sweet conversation that brings this sensation. Oh no, it's just the nearness of you. When you're in my arms, and I feel you so close to me, all my wildest dreams come true.
So, Sarah Vaughan. Soundies appeared on jukeboxes, and you put money in and you could go in a restaurant and you could watch Sarah Vaughan sing. Most of the soundies were ditties. They were cute tunes. They weren't really things like Mersey Dotes, remember that? Shoe Fly Pie and Apple Pan Dowdy, silly songs. However, Sarah Vaughan stood out. Sarah Vaughan left school at the age of, well, she was in 11th grade, and she knew already she was going to be a jazz singer. This is not intended to be a biography of her, but rather to present her a little bit with the backdrop of the culture of jazz. She was part of that. She was part of the bebop era. The musicians, her friends, the people she loved, she spent time with, were Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk, names that are now great historical figures in the history of American music. She was part of that. And she recorded after appearing at the Apollo Theater. This was in 1942. In the audience was Billy Eckstine and Earl Hines. Billy Eckstine was singing with the Earl Hines Band at that time. And in that performance, after she sang Body and Soul, Billy Eckstine turned to Earl Hines and said, "You get this singer." She was 19 or 20, and so she went on the road with Earl Hines. In the band of Earl Hines in the 40s were some of the greatest jazz musicians of this era, and she was with them. She traveled with them for several years, and during that period, bebop evolved, and Sarah Vaughan was part of that culture. Let's watch another video. This one is another one a little bit later, a song you'll all know. And as you watch it, think about how her interpretation is different from some other singer who I'm sure all of you will know when you hear the song. The song is Over the Rainbow. Sarah Vaughan, Over the Rainbow. We take a deep breath after listening to that performance. And I think that's a good point to contrast her singing with someone like Judy Garland. What Sarah Vaughan brought to the table was the new approach to jazz that began in the 40s. It was bebop. It was an emphasis on extending the chords and the possibilities in the music. Before the 40s, swing music, Ella Fitzgerald, who sang mostly in her early years with Chick Webb, ditties and cute songs, Tisket a Tasket, etc., eventually evolved into a wider format. And Dinah Washington, also a great jazz singer, whose format was primarily spirituals and religious music, evolved into what Sarah Vaughan brought to the table, which was bebop, a new approach to jazz. Interestingly, Dinah Washington, she often said, is her transition from spiritual music to jazz, all she did is drop the word God in her vocals, and it now was acceptable. So Sarah Vaughan now lived the bebop life. The place where bebop was founded was Minton's Playhouse. Today, now, this year, when Americans, Japanese people come to the States, specifically the Japanese who have a deep love for jazz, they will ask, where's Minton's Playhouse? Minton's Playhouse was a small bar up in Harlem where jazz, modern jazz, was created. And Sarah Vaughan was part of that. And let's go to an example of one aspect of modern jazz, which was the singing of bebop. And you'll hear a Sarah Vaughan sing in a bebop style with another very famous singer who I'm sure you will recognize as soon as you see him. Notice the give and take between the two performers. Notice how they follow each other. It is a good example of what modern jazz was doing that hadn't existed before. Here is Sarah Vaughan singing with Mel Torme.
Oh, sweet lovely lady, be good, sassy. Oh, lady, be good to me. I am so wonderfully misunderstood. Oh, lady, lady, sassy, be good to me. Oh, please give me a little pity. I'm all alone in this great big city, just a lonesome babe in the wood. Oh lady, oh lady, oh lady, be good to me. Let me hear it. Shabba-dabba-whip-boo-bee, shabba-dabba-whip-boo-bee, shabba-dabba-whip-boo-bee,
Mel Torme and Sarah Vaughan singing bebop. Let's talk a little bit about what bebop was. One of the things that existed in bebop was the use of the flatted fifth note on a chord, which gave the music a different sound. You hear that when Sarah Vaughan sings. She goes for different harmonies and extends what might be an easier transition to the next chord for something which is more expansive and which is a little bit more complex. The other factor that you found in bebop, of course there were many, was the risk. Jazz musicians take risks. There's no such thing to a jazz musician as a bad note, because a bad note can be resolved one step half. If I say anything and maybe I misstate a comment, I can probably resolve that comment by saying something after it, or repeating it enough time so the person thinks, oh, he really meant to say that. Jazz musicians learn how to do that. In fact, one of the great ways to practice to play is to play any note and see what you can do with that note and resolve it. Jazz musicians were risk takers. They were risk takers in their life, and they were risk takers in their, and bebop musicians in their musical life. Bebop was formed in the group that Sarah Vaughan lived with in her culture, and this is not widely known, but has come about through anecdotal interviews with musicians, because they were jazz musicians who did not get drafted. Why didn't they get drafted? Well, Dizzy Gillespie didn't get drafted because when he went to the draft board, he told them that he wasn't going to serve because he didn't feel our country was doing anything for him, and he wasn't going to have any part of it. And for whatever reason, he was excused. Other musicians who had been arrested for marijuana or drug offenses could not serve. Many of them feigned illnesses, escaped the draft, and that's one of the unwritten factors that accounted for the development of bebop. These musicians who were in their young 20s were at home during the war years and produced the new music. There's a great deal to say about it. Unfortunately, there isn't a large record of the music from that period that Sarah Vaughan was a part of, because there was a music strike that Petrillo had, which involved the unions, and there were no recordings made between 1941 and 1944. Digression, if you listen to some of Frank Sinatra's recordings during that period, they're with choirs or choruses, not with bands, because they could not hire musicians because of the strike. Let's move to another selection, and then we'll talk about it. The next one is a beautiful song, and Sarah Vaughan now is a little bit older, and this recording is from Sweden. And after we see it, we'll talk a little bit about jazz and the difference between Americans and European culture and the way they view this art form. Here is Sarah Vaughan singing Shadow of Your Smile.
We'd like to do a number that I recorded not too long ago. It's very beautiful, and we do hope that you enjoy. Shadow of your smile, when you are gone, will color my dreams and light. Look into my eyes, my love, and see
to hide. A teardrop is your lips and so remember spring. All the joy that love can bring. I'll be remembering the shadow of your smile. What's hard to hide? A teardrop kissed your lips, and so did I. Now when I remember spring, all the joy that love can bring, I'll be remembering the shadow of your smile. Remember spring. All the joy that love can bring. I'll be remembering the shadow of your smile. The shadow of your smile, the shadow of
That recording, as well as the next two we're going to see, are from Sweden. Why Sweden? Well, the fact of the matter is, until this day, jazz musicians know that if they go to Europe or they go to Asia and perform in large jazz festivals, and when they come back, and of course they will, that they can make more money than they can in the States and get employment and be treated with the respect that they feel they deserve. Jazz musicians of the 40s stayed at home, and many of them, after the war, some of them gradually moved to Europe, France, especially in Paris. Many of them were friends with Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus. On the left bank, Le Deux Magots. I don't speak French well, that's the best I can do. And there was a whole culture there of bebop musicians in France, because France represented freedom and the philosophy of existentialism related to the bebop movement. So the culture moved to Europe. Europeans love jazz in a way that Americans do not. And that exists to this day. This week, which is the first week in December. This week, I'm going to show something up at the screen, on the screen, a picture of the itinerary this week at a club called Small's Jazz Club in the Village, which now, because of the pandemic, cannot show live music. They are having virtual concerts, and they're funded, they're paid for. look at who is funding one of the concerts this week. If you can read it, you'll see it is the Swedish Embassy in New York. The Swedish Embassy. And this is symbolic of what had occurred with jazz after the bebop era. The European governments funded the arts in a way that America never did. Yes, we have the Kennedy Arts Center. Yes, we've done many great things in the arts. But Europeans to this day embrace jazz and funded it, government funded, and that's why we have these videos. Most of these videos are not in the United States because few of these musicians appeared on American television because of racial issues. We know what happened with Nat King Cole. His program was canceled, and it was an ongoing problem in our country. Especially in Holland, musicians found a freedom that they did not have in this country. The jazz culture moved to Holland, the Netherlands, which always allowed, and especially in their drug laws and a lot of their beliefs, allowed musicians to, quote, do their thing. So here's two more videos, once again from Sweden, Swedish television, televising Sarah Vaughan singing
Look at me. I'm as helpless as a kitten up a tree. Feel like I'm clinging to a cloud I can't understand. I get misty just holding your hand. Walk my way, and 1,000 violins begin to play. Might be the sound of your hello that music I hear. I get misty the moment you're near. You can see that you're leading me on. That is just what I want you to do. Don't you notice how hopelessly I'm lost? That's on my own. Will I wander through this wonderland alone? Never knowing my right foot from my left, my hat from my glove. I'm too misty and too much and too much love.
There we are, Sarah Vaughan singing Misty with a bad cold and probably some temperature too from the way that she looked on the camera. Sweden, all these videos are from there, and that's where the musicians, many of them lived and worked, and that's where most of the videos were made, in the Scandinavian countries, Germany, a few in England, and most of them in Holland. And to this day, it continues to be the case of the love that Europeans have for this art form. Now, the last video that we're going to see, which is going to tie it all up, brings us back to a reunion that Sarah Vaughan had with Billy Eckstine. After the bebop period, Billy Eckstine went on to a great career as a singer. There were many doors open to him. There were some that were closed. Sarah Vaughan's career was probably a greater career in terms of her wide world acceptance, and there were many tributes paid to her. She played in the White House and sang for 3 presidents. She sang for Eisenhower, she sang for Johnson, and she sang for Ronald Reagan. There are videos of all of them that we could show. She made an interesting comment before she went on the stage when she performed for Lyndon Johnson. She was crying before she went on the stage, and someone asked her, "Why are you crying?" She said, "When I first came here and I sang for Eisenhower, I had to go through the kitchen door." And so let's conclude with Sarah Vaughan singing in a reunion with Billy Eckstine, whose voice was moving, he was losing a little bit of the chops, as they say, but he was still Mr. B. Here is Dedicated to You.
That hope would be like my heart and me, dedicated to you. If I should paint a picture too that showed the love that there's in you, that would be like my heart and me, dedicated to you. Because your love is a beacon that lights up my way. To you, because with you I know a lifetime will be just a heavenly day. And if I find a twinkling star, one half as wondrous as you are, that's only like my heart beat.
Sarah Vaughan and Billy Eckstein. It was Billy Eckstein who was the first one to identify Sarah Vaughan as a great talent, and they had several reunions. They were very close, dear friends throughout their lives together. They were integral and part of the jazz of the 40s and the culture of jazz that evolved during that period. And I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I want to give you my email address if any of you would like to make comments or add something or correct something possibly that I said. My email address is 16barney@gmail.com. Barack Obama said in 2009 at the Kennedy Arts in Washington that you can't understand America unless you understand jazz. By looking at the lives of these jazz musicians and the culture that they grew up in, you get a better sense not only of the obstacles that faced the art form, but also how the music evolved in the context of some of the great events in our country. The Second World War, how it affected jazz, the period of the 60s, when Dizzy Gillespie ran for president, believe it or not, for a few weeks. And there were a lot of interesting things that happened. I hope we are able to do this again, and I want to thank Fred very much for the opportunity to do so, and to John for the technical expertise. Thank you very much, Fred.
And thank you, Bonnie Lessing. Bonnie Lessing introduced us to the iconic Sarah Vaughan. For many of us, it was a reintroduction. But I hope you'll make note of his email, because while the program was going on, I got 2 emails on my cell phone from residents who said, "This is terrific, we must have more." So if you have a favorite jazz musician, a singer, or an instrumentalist, please write to Barney and make that recommendation. And we will certainly have Barney Lessing back to bring us, as he pointed out, the heart of American music, jazz. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.